Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, which would you prefer? One Thursday night game or two Monday night games like we had tonight?
I would have to imagine that if I got two random Monday night games, they'd be better than what we saw. But given the performances we saw, I would say a random Thursday night game was better than the two Monday night games, even though they both came down to the last drive, which is pretty exciting. It was like pretty poorly executed football. But the worst is that I had to split my attention. Which, I know, the noon games, you have to split your attention if you want to cover nationally or whatever. But at least, you've got Red Zone helping you. There's, a whole process. Here, it was just, people were having national conversations about both teams. And so you wanted to keep up with both, and you really couldn't. So that kind of sucks. So I guess most instances, two Monday night games. But in this particular instance, a random Thursday night game.
It was kind of fun to watch, watching the one end. Like if you stacked them like they've done in the past, then it works a little bit better. By the time the one game's done, but as the time the one game's done, oh, hey, they're into the fourth quarter of the other game. Great, we can move on to that. That works, but having them both start basically the same time, I believe they were at the same time, why is this even a thing this year?
There's pieces out there that are answering that question, hey, why are they starting at the same time? We talked to some experts or whatever. We talked to people at ABC, ESPN. And the answer does not make sense to me. They were conducting essentially A/B testing to see which game people would tune into more, whether it mattered if it was on ABC, because one was on ABC, one was on ESPN. And they said something like, this will allow us to better figure out which games should start earlier. And it's no, it doesn't. Why would it help you do that? The Green Bay and New York have a much larger fan base, and Miami is a more interesting team. And whichever one of those matters, people will flock to more in terms of viewership. Maybe. But this is just one instance.
And Tennessee,
it just made
Tennessee
my experience
just doesn't
worse.
have any fans. Yeah.
Yeah, they barely have a football team, right? Yeah. So who's that help?
Which is even funnier because they won. But yeah.
Yeah, and they won somehow. They were down 14. It's a 760 game losing streak for people down 14 in the fourth quarter. Mike Vrabel makes the analytics decision to go for 2 down 8, which is incredible. Holy crap. And that's why they win. Cool. But also man, Miami, that's rough. Miami played like it was a Thursday night game. They even got hurt like it was a Thursday night game. That was nuts.
It's crazy.
But yeah.
Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. If I sound annoyed, it's because we have to recap the Raiders-Vikings game. And let me tell you, there is no joy in doing that. But we will endeavor to persevere and discuss at length the best play of the game, which was obviously the punt by Greg Joseph, and where that ranks statistically. So we'll be discussing that, and we have a mailbag as well. But before we do, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us out financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month or a little less for the year subscription. You get access to bonus material. You get access to the Discord. We are going to be doing something here probably for the end of the year. I'll probably be doing a watch along with the Discord with the video feature on there. So check that out a little bit later. But with Christmas coming, that means the Christmas clip shows are coming out. And that also means that we will be giving an extra one out to the Patreon people because they are so lovely. So again, patreon.com/NorseCode, and a special thank you to Sean Smith, who was our latest Patreon subscriber. Thank you so much. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well, if you'd like to give a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick yourself up any number of wonderful Norse Code items, including t-shirts, baby onesies, shower curtains, throw pillows, all of that. I forgot to mention this pre-show, Arif, but if a package comes to you in the next week, hold off on it. Don't open it until show 500. We've got show 500 coming up next week, so let's hold off on that. But if something comes in the next week, hold off. We'll open it for show 500.
Oh boy, great! So we want me to open it live in a video or just on the podcast? I'm not comfortable with any of this.
I mean, I did it for show 400. I feel like you should be able to do it for show 500. So
yeah, but I'm the protagonist of reality.
Oh no! The leopard, the leopard eating face party. Oh no! They finally came for me. Oh no! I was having so much fun reaping. I have to. Oh no! Oh no! All right. Well, in any case, norsecode.threadless.com for all of your Norse code needs. Let's get into the game, I suppose. A lot of things in Las Vegas they try to do as experiences. Like, that's kind of how they get away with, charging so much for certain items and certain things. Whether it's shows or whatever, they want to give you something that you can't bring home in your, carry-on. And this game was absolutely an experience. It wasn't good. That was never the point. But this game was absolutely an experience that you will be telling people about for decades to come. And it was a nearly 0-0 affair going into overtime before Greg Joseph miraculously hit a field goal after missing one earlier in the day. This was after a quarterback change. This was after a remarkable defensive, there's only so many.
You having trouble going through all of it?
Well, there's not much to recap. There weren't that many positive plays.
There were a lot of positive plays. They just didn't allow anybody to score any points. Josh Metellus had a positive play or two. Ivan Pace had a number of positive plays.
Right around the time
Murphy had a positive play.
Right around the time that Mark Sanchez is sandbagging you for how many points you've scored in the day. It's time to hang it up for the game. It's done. I'm almost at a lack of words trying to discuss just how dumb this game truly was. But I think the dumbest part about it is that the fact that the Vikings managed to win it. We talked earlier in the season about how the Minnesota Vikings were going to have to be inventive this year in coming up with ways to play bizarre games, because the deck was pretty stacked because of what had happened last year. Last year, we had all sorts of just craziness. And nearly a year to the day, to the Indianapolis Colts game, where the Vikings came back with the biggest comeback in NFL history, we have the game that nearly went to a 0-0 tie. Unreal.
It would have been so nice if they had done that instead. And it really wouldn't have materially impacted my experience of the game, because they went 58 minutes without scoring a point. What's two more? Obviously, there would be 10 more minutes of the game. But at least once you go into overtime, that turnover, you're now you can root for the tie, because it's just well, I'm already here, right? We might as well make some NFL history while
we had that. We had that last year at the very end of the season, didn't we? When everyone with every NFL fan just cheering for the tie with a game so another team could end up making it into the playoffs. We had that last year, but it wasn't to this extent. This game had all the charm offensively of a terrible weather game. The sort of game where it's just raining in sheets. People are sliding all over the place. They can't do anything. You can't run. You can't pass. You can't do anything. And so offensively, you're just punting all day. It had all the charm of that, but it was indoors.
I think Luke Braun mentioned that this was the lowest scoring indoor game in NFL history because the other two lowest scoring games, one was that Miami-Pittsburgh game that was in a monsoon. The other one was at the Met.
In a swamp.
How does that happen? I can't, I'm my brain is just like, how does this happen? Because like, at least in a terrible offensive game and some good defenses, I don't want to give the Raiders defense too much credit here, but you got, some good defensive play. You've got some really bad offensive play. This can often result in things like safeties, defensive scores, the defense giving up field position in scoring position, right? Which I guess technically the Raiders did get into scoring position once, and the Vikings just forced a fumble. But like, you would think that like the push and pull on an NFL field is such that like at some point someone's going to get into a spot to score. It's just like the way the NFL is designed. Even with bad offenses, someone gets in a spot to score because the bad offenses beget good defenses, beget good field position for those bad offenses, and then that means you get us. It just didn't happen. It just didn't happen.
So the reason why it didn't happen in the Steelers-Miami game was because of the field condition. Now, it was raining hard during that game, but the field condition was why. They couldn't do anything because the field had been torn up and terrible because they had played a couple of games on it like in the days before. Like, I forget if it was like a high school or a college thing. And then it rained and rained and rained and rained. So the field was just ruined. And instead of like tearing it up and putting something new down, they just put new sod over it. So it was, and then
there was no drainage solution. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it just rained on top of that. So it was a swamp. This is the game where if you look back on YouTube replays, the punt that stuck into the dirt, it didn't bounce. Yeah. It just sunk into it. That's what the players were dealing with. They couldn't run down the field. They couldn't pass. They could only slog through, and their cleats were useless. That's what led to this score last time. This time, it was an incredibly anemic performance by both offenses, and Davante Adams doing his best second year of the Raiders impression of Randy Moss. He did not want to be anywhere near that game.
Davante Adams getting like buco yardage on the final play for nothing was incredible. I was in the middle of like adding it up for Football Party, and then I realized like Football Party is like not a podcast for caring about these things, so I just stopped. But sorry, that's just like, I think that's fair, right? But I would try to calculate the useless yardage in the game for Aiden O'Connell. One of it is that 24-yard pass that he's credited for Davante Adams at the end, which amounted to nothing. But there's also like an end of half set of passes that the announcers were praising him for, but he had a 12-yard, a 14-yard, and a 7-yard pass in there. So let's just do this now. 12 plus 14 plus 7 plus 24. So he had 57 yards that were useless, that the Vikings were willingly giving up, that they had set up their defense to say, hey, you can take some of these short yardage. You can even get some yak. The point here is that we're going to drain the clock. So completions are bad for you, especially if they're short completions. And Aiden O'Connell was like, short completions? Finally, I've only been throwing short incompletions the whole game. Which, by the way, he had a third percentile average depth of target. It was one of the shortest depths of target we've ever seen in an NFL game. The Vikings are like excelling at that. So he threw for 171 passing yards, right? 57 of them were pointless. They were useless, right? So he has 138 passing yards in the game. They came on 32 attempts, but we just got rid of 4 of those attempts. So let's get rid of those attempts when we divide it. So 28 attempts, right? 4.9 yards per attempt on plays that mattered. We should also include the sacks. So let's get rid of one of those sacks. One of those sacks occurred at the end of the half, right? So it is an 11-yard sack. So he's got 3 yards and 14 sacks. So we'll take 138 minus 14. We'll add 3 to the denominator, so that's 31. So we've got 124 divided by 31, 4 net yards per attempt. And that doesn't even include like the adjustment that you'd make for the interception. So rough day for Aiden O'Connell. Not great. He basically had as many net yards as like Nick Mullins if Nick Mullins had one more drive. Like if the third drive that Nick Mullins had played in had mattered instead of it being a clock drive, like he would have, in 3 drives, would have had more yards than Aiden O'Connell. It just like wild to me how bad it was, which is good for the defense, but also meant that we just like didn't get like points, which a lot of people seem to enjoy when watching football when people score.
As it turns out, something people enjoy. Well, let's talk about the defense. Well, actually, before we talk defense, important thing to note, Justin Jefferson goes down with an injury. It looked to be ribs or kidney. That was later revealed to be involving chest. But the coaching staff for the Vikings seemed to be optimistic that he's going to end up playing on Saturday. Is that what you took away from the presser?
Yeah, and that was the takeaway from the presser, and then in the follow up on Monday, it felt like they were fairly optimistic. That I think the phrase that Albert Breer used was like day to day, which is like it's technically like a basketball phrase because that's like in a designation in basketball, but it gives us an understanding of like what this is, right? So there is a pretty decent chance that he could play. I know some reporters think that the chance is just below 50%. Some reporters think the chance is a little bit above 50%. No one has used numbers. I'm kind of reading the tea leaves on the way they're wording their tweets. But that seems to be the feeling, right? That there is a pretty decent chance that he'll play, which is nuts because he went to the hospital, right? They were like worried. It's like extremely like, of course this happened, right? Because it's like, hey, we wanted to see Joshua Dobbs in a scenario where he'd at least be given a bit of a chance, right? And then Justin Jefferson gets injured partway through the game. Alexander Mattison gets injured. 2 other offensive linemen get injured. One of the offensive linemen couldn't play before the game, so that was like Ed Ingram, so they had to start Blake Randall instead of him. So like he's missing 3 offensive linemen, his starting running back, and his starting receiver, right? And it's like, Jesus, man, like the whole point of this game is that you get at least a somewhat even playing field. And it's not like the Raiders have like a good defense, right? Like we previewed the game with Ted. Ted was like, yeah, they've got like 1.5 good defensive players, right? Like it was just like we like, that's the score, right? Like we know it. So that was going to be the opportunity, and so it got like taken away from him in a sense, right? So it was very frustrating. But also we've been waiting so long for Justin Jefferson to get back. So just for that to happen, it kind of sucks. So it's like good news, right? That the injury doesn't seem nearly as severe as like the phrase he was taken to the hospital would make you believe. But, it sucks.
At the same time, it wasn't great to see Justin Jefferson put out there in a literal hospital ball toss. Like, that's... And a lot of people have said that Kirk was throwing them even higher earlier in the season, but to see him actually have to go to the hospital for a crossing route, that pretty much said everything I needed to say for the year. Is one of those, like, I don't want to see Josh Dobbs throwing to Justin Jefferson without Jefferson getting like guaranteed money.
Right. It sucks because like a lot of people think that any throw over the middle with a potential lurking safety or linebacker is a hospital ball. And it's not. The Vikings have actually done very well on crossing routes for Justin Jefferson in those situations without him having to go to the hospital. And so it was actually kind of funny. I think one tweet that was, I wouldn't say going viral, but getting some traction, called it a medicine ball. And it's like, bud, you're kind of close, but like a medicine ball is like a physical object that we know what that is. Like you can't do that. But yeah, and some people were talking about that. No, it was just the ball placement that was the problem. The timing, I don't think is a huge issue. Like if the ball placement was better, the timing would have been better. So it kind of doesn't matter. But like that's the route you throw against that coverage. That was the correct read. And like the thing is, he wasn't always making the correct read at the correct time. And it's like, oh man, I really want to give you partial credit for this, but the best player on the team went to the hospital, so I can't. Like it's just like one of those situations, right? So if he throws it in stride, not only is Jefferson healthy, he's still running. Like that's a crosser where the safety has a bad angle. If he's running at full speed, and so he's got an opportunity to generate a ton of yak, right? But the ball was high, so Jefferson's in the air. Marcus Epps hits him. Clean hit, by the way, right? It was just his shoulder into the back of his shoulder, I guess. It was almost shoulder to shoulder, but shoulder to back, really. And Jefferson just gets injured. It's just football, right? That sucks. It was kind of characteristic of the way Dobbs is playing. He's throwing it pretty high. And if you've got a quarterback that's prone to throw high versus a quarterback that's prone to throw low, that's probably worse because you're not. I mean, it's not worse because of the injuries. That's, if you throw too low, a receiver has to adjust. They could get hit that way too. But rather because you're more likely to throw an interception on an overthrow than an underthrow. Not that you want Donovan McNabb out there, but you're just more likely to have those negative plays on overthrows. But yeah, I mean, it's tough to talk about Joshua Dobbs's game overall. We might as well just transition into that because like he was done super dirty in a way that Nick Mullins wasn't, and in a way that's like no one's fault except the receivers, right? Like no one was maliciously trying to make Joshua Dobbs look worse, right? And I don't want to take away that he should have thrown basically a pick six on the first play of the game. That happened, right? So I'm not going to say that Dobbs played well, right? But you take a look at his statistics, an abysmal yards per attempt, a 45 or whatever % completion rate, when his expected completion rate based off of distance downfield should have been like 70%. So you had like one of the worst CPOEs we've ever seen, right? At like minus 22. Okay, so like that's rough, right? But he also had 6 drops by PFF. PFF has a fairly stringent standard for what they constitute as a drop. 37.5% of his catchable passes, and we could talk about what catchable means in a second, his catchable passes were dropped. That's insane. Get a 45% pressure rate. And yeah, he was holding onto the ball a lot. He was inviting a lot of that pressure. I don't want to discount that either, right? That 100% happened. But his offensive linemen were giving up free runners or giving up pressure quickly way more often than when Nick Mullins was in. And again, I know that holding onto the ball creates more pressure. And I know that changing your launch point, which is something Dobbs did a lot, invites pressure even when you don't take longer to hold onto the ball, right? So if you're bailing on the pocket really quickly, you're going to invite pressure because now the edge rushers can release. And if they don't release, it's usually holding on the offensive lineman, right? So like, I know all of that's true. Even with taking into account, Nick Mullins had a better pass protection situation in his 3 drives, really 2 drives, than Josh Dobbs had in his 8 drives, right? Nick Mullins had a better catching situation because he didn't have any drops and he only had 1 contested catch loss and he had a contested catch win. Joshua Dobbs had like 5 contested catch losses and 1 contested catch win. So he lost 3 of his potential contested catches that he should have won. And he lost 6 drops. So maybe, he should have gotten 4 of those back for a typical game, right? So his adjusted completion rate based off of, these statistics was actually higher than Aiden O'Connell, or not Aiden O'Connell. Well, it would have been Aiden O'Connell's, but Nick Mullins, right? So the ball hit the receiver's hands more often and more consistently for Joshua Dobbs than they did Aiden O'Connell. That doesn't mean he played better. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Nick Mullins was throwing it further downfield than Dobbs was. He was throwing it on time. And then when the ball was getting into the vicinity of the receiver, the ball placement was superior, right? And this is where I do want to talk about like what catchability is. Because like someone asked me like, hey, does Joshua Dobbs just like not throw a very catchable pass? Like, is it possible for a quarterback to increase drop rates? And it is possible. I think I've talked about this before, in particular in reference to Cousins, who has had, problems with drop rates from his receivers before, has had a particularly bad problem of it this year. And a lot of times when we see a ball hit a receiver's hands, the commentary is, well, you got to catch that. And like, that's true, but I don't want to absolve bad ball placement in increasing the likelihood that a drop is going to occur. So if you throw it behind a receiver, you're increasing the likelihood that a drop is going to occur. That doesn't mean throwing behind a receiver is bad. Sometimes you do that to protect the receiver. Sometimes you do that to prevent an interception. Sometimes you do that because that angle creates better yards after the catch. There's a lot of reasons to do it, but it does make it harder to catch the ball. So it's not a bad throw necessarily, but it does make it harder to catch the ball. It's just that risk is worth the reward because you're protecting the receiver, increasing yak, preventing an interception, whatever, right? But it does increase the chances that you'll drop it. You're just accepting that risk, right? So it is possible that you can increase the risk that the receiver drops the ball and still throw a good pass, but those should impact our understanding of these drop rates. Now, Cousins had kind of that issue in the first couple of games of the season, but for the most part, especially the final 4 games before he got injured, he was playing insane football. He was playing so good. And the ball placement, like if I was going to talk about all the features of like what was making him play well, this year, ball placement's probably not at the top of the list in terms of like all the things that were impressive, but it's certainly not at the bottom. He was doing a pretty good job. And he still had a high drop rate. So we know that the drops, especially in a non-Justin Jefferson environment, are a problem that's kind of endemic to this receiving core. But Dobbs was doing exactly that. He was increasing the likelihood that a catch would be dropped by increasing the difficulty of those catches. Now, the receivers were not doing a good job either, right? This isn't to completely absolve them either. And one play where I think there's a good example of this is fairly early on, Dobbs throws a pretty high pass to KJ Osborne. I don't think he should have thrown that pass. So that's still a negative for me because Osborne is covered. And in my recollection of that play, there is an open receiver. And, sometimes you have open receivers and they're not in the progression. You can't always blame the quarterback. But if that happens a lot, then at some point that is on the quarterback. They have to get to the progressions a little bit better or figure out what the pre-snap diagnosis is and switch to the other side of the field or figure out, the alert system, whatever, right? That happens often enough. But here I thought Osborne was just covered, so you probably should have thrown it somewhere else. He throws it high, and in this case, throwing it high is good because only Osborne has access to that ball. So in that one instance, throwing high is good. Most of the instances in that game, it's not. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, at least in that scenario, it was intentional because it's the only place that the ball should go if you're going to throw that. Okay, so he does that. Osborne has essentially 2 options. He can cut up field as he's tracking the ball and get in over the shoulder, right? Or he could cut up field, run past where it's going to be, and then turn around and treat it like an underthrow, even though it's an overthrow. Or he can try and high point it. Well, he tried to high point it, and that makes it kind of a contested catch. I don't know if PFF counted that as a drop or contested catch. I'm going to assume they counted it as a contested catch. Osborne was 0 of 2 on contested catches, and he also had 2 drops. And Osborne made it harder for himself too. In this situation, Dobbs threw the only pass that he could have thrown if he was going to throw to Osborne. So I'm not going to say that's a situation where he maximized it, but he shouldn't have thrown the pass. It wasn't great, whatever, right? But that's what I'm like. That's one of the issues is that there are some instances where the receivers could have played it a little bit differently, that could have maximized their odds a little bit, and they didn't, and they failed Dobbs in that way, in a way that they didn't fail Mullins, and so it is kind of frustrating. And so you see like these 8 drives, Dobbs is at quarterback, they do not score. In 2 drives, Nick Mullins scores, and then he has a clock drive, so I'm not counting that 3rd drive. And like that by itself, you're just like, well, that tells you everything, right? Nick Mullins has better statistics, he has better completion rate, he has higher EPA per play, he has higher yards per attempt, he has higher everything, right? CPOE, so when you account for the difficulty of the throw, his completion rate is higher. His off-target throws happened at about the same frequency as Joshua Dobbs. In fact, Dobbs had a higher adjusted completion rate. I already mentioned that. His best play careened off of a defender.
Yeah.
Like,
clearly bounced off of the defender's hands.
And it's like, okay, so here's Dobbs getting screwed by his receivers the whole game. In the very first play for Nick Mullins, he gets the gift of his life. Are you kidding? I'm screaming. That's nuts to me, man.
As soon as that bounced off of his hands, I went, oh, there's a pit. No. Okay.
Right.
Keep
and
going.
Of all people reel it in, of course, it's TJ Hawkinson, a guy that's been getting a bunch of crap for, dropping passes or not winning contested catches or whatever, right?
I love that he's getting that while he just got the most catches for a tight end in Vikings history in a season.
Oh, it's beautiful. He leads the league in targets among tight ends. He leads the league in receptions among tight ends. I think he's second or third in yards among tight ends. And we're all like, this bum. Which, like, I think in context is kind of fair, but also, like, we gotta like figure out kind of what we mean when we say that.
Like, what a bum. What an absolute wreck. Can't believe we're paying this guy. Oh, he just, like, immediately after his first catch, had most catches in a Vikings uniform in a season. Just like, oh.
It's like, all right.
Fine. Just more than Kyle Rudolph. Oh. Well, that's a stat I wasn't expecting to see.
Steve Jordan's in the dust. Kyle Rudolph is getting lapped. Like, okay, fine. Sure. Why not, man?
Jim Kleinsasser is confused. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
Shenko's like, what? Like, he's getting out of the shower all confused. Yeah, it's weird.
But Joe Sensor is updating his license and registration. That was in poor taste. But
like mine wasn't, yeah.
Yeah, right. But it's like, it really depends on your expectation. Now, if your expectation is relative to his absolute salary, you're like, you should be playing like the best tight end in football. He's not. And I got a bunch of crap for it. I already mentioned this on Twitter, so I don't want to complain too much because, you complain about the same thing too often. Now it's your thing. But, Sam is... Well, okay, so this is 100% honestly the truth. Sam is like a really incredible host because he sets up really great conversations and he's willing to bite so many bullets to do it, right? Like he puts out a take that's going to make him look ridiculous, and it allows Luke and I, or whoever's on the show, whether that's like Alec or Tom or whoever, to like react to it. And we have some really good conversations. So I just want to put that out there, right? But here, like, I feel like Sam set me up because he was like, hey, Arif, he leads the league in like targets and catches. Is he the best tight end in the NFL? And I'm just like, look, all I get to do in this segment is criticize him. And I don't want to do that because he's playing really well. He's a very good football player. He's one of the best tight ends in the NFL. You're asking me if he's the best? No, he's not. And so then I have to nitpick him, and I talk about like missing these relatively easy catches, about the contested catch problem, the fact that he is at best an above average blocker. And when you're looking at like someone like George Kittle or Travis Kelce, like they're just better at those things, much better blockers, much better receivers overall. And Kittle, and at the time, like Kelce's been playing fewer games, so like his yards per game is higher, but it's like total yardage is lower or whatever, right? And so in the comment section, people are just like mad at me for criticizing him. And I rewatched that bit because I have to like log all the things I do for my invoices. I rewatched that bit and I thought I was being as generous as I could be. I was like, look, he's very good. He does all this. He's great. You're asking me if he's the best. So the answer is no. And it's like, this game is kind of why, but then also he reels in this Nick Mullins catch and you're just like, good Lord, man. Like, I'm not saying Josh Dobbs has had an unfair shake of things, like relative to like a person, right? Because he's like an NFL quarterback, he's getting paid and all that. But man, this is not fair. And the thing is, coming away from all of this, I'm talking about like how Josh Dobbs got screwed and Nick Mullins didn't. And when you put all of these kind of metrics together, like Dobbs is a little bit ahead in terms of production and performance, even though he had the turnover worthy play and Nick Mullins didn't. At least Dobbs has a big time throw that was dropped, a big time throw of his own added in there, whereas Mullins is the closest thing he had a big time throw hit a defender, right? So he's got like all of these kind of production things that are mostly in his favor, aside from the turnover-worthy play. But at the end of the day, I think Nick Mullins, from a traits perspective, should start going forward, right? I don't want to be like, everybody thinks Nick Mullins should start. I don't want to be in a position where I'm just being contrarian to be contrarian. I just want to put it all together in terms of context, because Dobbs is in an incredibly unfair situation, not just because of the receiver stuff or the offensive line stuff, or I guess the running back stuff, right? That like kind of matters. But also because like he's going to lose out on his contract, right? Because he doesn't know an offense that he just like showed up one day and they were like, here you go. And he has to like run an NFL offense. That sucks. That's not fair. But like they shouldn't start people because of like what's fair. And it still would be unfair to actually start him anyway. So, whatever. He's in a tough situation. He's getting paid for it. I'd love to get that much money, but he's in a tough situation. Nick Mullins is going to help you more, right? Like someone tweeted when I was just like, oh my God, I cannot believe that first pass that he gets was like this gift that hit a defender. This is so ridiculous that this is like what we get to contrast. And then like the next pass he threw behind Jalen Nailor, which that might have been Nailor's fault. Fair enough. Maybe Nailor's had a consistent timing problem. Check that out. Luke Braun wrote about it over at the Wide Left Substack. But like he's had a consistent timing problem with his routes. And so maybe, that's whatever it is, right? He throws it behind Nailor. And so someone tweets like, well, the offense feels better or something along those lines, right? With Nick Mullins in. And I made fun of him, but he's like not wrong. Like it does. Because as soon as he drops back, that ball is out. Like he drops back to pass, the ball is out. And it's decisive. He knows where he's going. He understands the rhythm and the timing of the offense. He's reading the defense relatively quickly. And he's just getting rid of the ball. And his arm strength is fine. So the ball is just moving, right? And you're not getting that with Dobbs. Like Dobbs has better arm strength. I'm going to say most of the time because he doesn't always throw with great mechanics and that kind of, but he has better arm strength generally, but you just don't get to like see it, right? Because if he's not throwing on time, like all of these passes are just doing different things now. And Nick Mullins is just going 1, 2, 3, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go. Like he has the offense down, and Dobbs is just not going to have the offense down, not without an offseason, right? And so Mullins should start, even though I think if we break it down play by play, and like there's like multiple people who like looked over at play by play and they were like, hey, I don't know that Dobbs actually played that much worse than Mullins, or maybe even at all. And I still think Mullins, from a way that you would have, like if you were doing draft analysis, Mullins is the better quarterback, even though Dobbs, from a certain perspective of production, do you count for drops and stuff, had better production. Mullins played better from the perspective of what you're looking for in a quarterback. And it's not really Josh Dobbs's fault. Kind of. Dobbs is on his 7th team for a reason, right? He's moved around for a reason. But there's that. And the one thing is just that, like, the reason I would, and I admitted in my piece on starting Joshua Dobbs, I admitted that it's very, very likely the case that Nick Mullins is a better quarterback, but it's also likely the case that he has a smaller bandwidth of outcomes, and you want to have a large bandwidth of outcomes. Someone asked me, hey, does that change if the defense is very good? And it does, and I tested that in the piece. And so your ability to absorb some risk goes down. And so your ability to take a lower average performance in order to get a more volatile performance, because you might get to score 30 or 0, that goes down the better your defense is. And you can't really get better than 0 points, right? So you need somebody that's going to score any points. And hey, one of them did it. And again, like Greg Joseph was set up for a 49-yard field goal. It's an indoor field goal that gets made in the modern NFL about 70% of the time, maybe even better, right? So like he should have made that. And the fact that we're talking about Josh Dobbs like he didn't lead any scoring drives, like that sucks. Like again, not his fault. But it should be noted that Nick Mullins did lead the, like, it was like a chip shot.
Yeah.
Right? So
nobody helped Josh Dobbs out there on as it turns out,
including Dobbs, right? Like,
yeah. The only person who helped Dobbs was Justin Jefferson, and he went to the hospital for it.
Yeah, for his trouble, right?
Just, ugh. Well, can we talk about the defense? The defense actually
God,
did
they
some
were
work.
good, huh?
God, what a like I missed the stat, but this is only, one of a handful of times in Vikings franchise history where they served the donut. 0 points on the board.
Take that donut. Yeah.
That is phenomenal. That is wonderful. This defense especially came up big at a time when they were not asked to do as much at the end as it turned out. Like that pick was great.
Yeah, the pick was great. The sack was fantastic. Probably didn't need to do either of them great, but they did. They were put into one situation. I will say this: they were put into one situation where they needed to perform, and that's when the Raiders somehow managed to find themselves in the red zone. And honestly, they should have just set up a field goal on first down. They should have just been like, "Oh my God, we got here! Thank you, Hunter Renfrow." Anyway,
and
let's
let's start going backwards.
And then a fumble, like great job, Josh Metellus. But oh my God. So the defense played lights out. There was like one, I guess you could call it a bust, but like one big play that mattered, right? And that was the Hunter Renfrow, and it ended up not mattering. And it's like, if you can limit an offense to like one play, wow. I would say of the players in the back seven, however you want to constitute the back seven. So if we're ignoring the front, of the players, not that the front played poorly either, but like of the players in the back seven, maybe the worst performing player was Byron Murphy, and he had some good plays. Like that's like that. Like that's not a bad place to be. I should probably like check what PFF has to say about that defense, but based off of like my read of that, it was just like, yeah, Byron Murphy. I guess he had the worst game out of like all of the players in the defense. Sure. He probably just ended up having a good game, right? So it's like that's like what level we're kind of dealing with, right? Harrison Smith did all right. I think Cam Bynum missed a tackle on a run, if I remember that correctly, and then he made up for it. So I'm looking. Okay, so I guess Sheldon Day. Yeah, Byron Murphy has the lowest. Okay, I nailed it. So in the back seven, Byron Murphy had the lowest PFF grade. It was a 58.6. 60 is basically average. Not average, like closer to replacement level. Like 67 is closer to average. But like, okay, yeah. He gave up a couple. I'm not going to count the 24-yarder against him. He gave up a couple. He was the one that gave up the Hunter Renfrow thing. He was the one trailing in coverage. Okay, cool. That was the worst. I guess Sheldon Day. That was like the worst performance. That was a great time. Good job. And of course, like, so DJ Wanham gets his like unblocked sack. Good for him. He ends up with a 64.9. But like Harrison Phillips had a day. He was pretty good, especially in like run defense, but he did get that sack, which was nice. He's primarily good in run defense, but I'm glad he got a sack. Jonathan Bullard, I thought, had a great game. I'm just going up through the PFF list, but like Bullard had a great game. Daniil Hunter finished with 2 tackles and 1 quarterback hit. And I was like, he was the best performing player in that front four, right? Like if you get rid of Ivan Pace and Josh Metellus, Daniil Hunter might have been the best player, was my take. And it looks like in 19 snaps, Mekhi Blackman is the only one with a higher grade than him that are not those two. So I feel good about that too, that I got that right. But like Hunter had an outstanding game. So yeah, he had the 1 hit, but he also had, according to PFF, 6 pressures. To me, it was constant pressure. I didn't count it up. Constant pressure. And those constant pressures resulted in throwaways. They resulted in at least 1 sack. So he kind of helped the DJ Wanham sack. So did Harrison Smith. But like it resulted in that sack, helped Harrison Phillips with this sack, forced the throwaway, but also forced like an intentional grounding penalty. Like he had a huge impact for a guy with like 2 tackles and 1 hit. Like he just didn't show up in the box score in the same way. He was phenomenal in that game. But Metellus was like amazing. Like Metellus had the quietest game he's had in like 6 weeks, and he had a great game. Like in addition to that fumble, he quote unquote gave up a bunch of like receptions, but they were all short underneath. He gave up like 11 yards total of yards after the catch. It was good. Like the receptions he gave up essentially were good receptions to give up. And he showed up in the run game in a big way. He showed up with that forced fumble, which was fantastic. He had a great game. Ivan Pace had, that was one of the best linebacker games I've seen. Oh my gosh. So in the first quarter, he ends up with 7 solo tackles and 1 assist. So 8 combined tackles in the first quarter. The Raiders had run 19 plays, and he had impacted just under half of them. Like, oh my God. And in fact, he was initially credited with 2 assists. They took one away. It was part of like 8 players tackled the guy. So, in a sense, he kind of did get like half in on half of those plays. So he had that, right? He had the game sealing interception. Okay, fantastic. He also had the game ending sack, I guess. Wow, way to show up big at every possible moment. And his tackles were good. Like, they weren't just like, hey, he gave up a thing in coverage and he tackled the guy, right? Which you often see. He had 7 stops. 7 tackles that constituted a loss, a negative EPA play for the defense. 7. That's mind-boggling, right? So he's going out there on screens and shutting them down. He's out there in the run game shutting it down. He's creating stops on passing plays where he gave up the reception because there are 68 seconds left, and you throwing a 7-yard over the middle thing just for Ivan Pace to tackle it is actually worse for you, right? It's like one of those situations. He was outstanding, and his weakness is coverage, and he did not give up a meaningful passing coverage. All of the passes he gave up were just not. It was better that he gave them up, essentially. He was great. He was in the backfield on tackles for loss. He was in backfields on the sack. He set up he set up other players to have success by taking on tight ends and fullbacks later in the game when they were trying to find ways to get out of their way to block him. He starts squeezing those lanes and making it difficult to run. He was every phase. He was insane.
This is a championship defense and a $2 offense.
Yeah, kinda. Yeah. Not even kinda. Definitely.
Paraphrasing and putting words into the mouth of Kevin O'Connell here, but in the post game locker room speech, he'd mentioned this is repeatedly. This is a championship defense. This is a championship defense. He might not be wrong, but this is a team that is currently in a playoff spot and gonna get destroyed. But it's nice to see that the Vikings could make it into the wild card. Before we move to the mailbag, let's talk about Greg Joseph and specifically whatever the hell that punt was and where it ranks all time in net punt yards.
The field position was not worth it. Let's get that out of the way.
Absolutely not. No one, and to their, I don't think anyone except Kevin O'Connell and possibly Greg Joseph knew that this is what they were going to be doing. Based on
the long snapper had to know, right? So that's the third person that has to know.
All right, so 3 people. This did not include anybody going, oh, we're going to have to tackle now?
They didn't seem particularly set up to. They didn't expect to have to tackle.
No,
yeah.
This was the poor communication at best, and I don't know if he has a history of punting. I didn't look it up. I just know that this was poor and that nobody was ready for it, let alone the people who were supposed to tackle. So. Can we break this play down exactly? Why do you do it? And why would you not take the points here?
All right. So there's a couple of reasons, right? That I'm going to game this out in a way that is essentially in Kevin O'Connell's favor, right? So for context, the Vikings rush up the middle for 3 yards with 1:02 left. They take their final timeout with 18 seconds left, right? Because they don't want to take a delay of game penalty. Because if they take up a delay of game penalty, now they have to punt as opposed to set up a reasonable looking field goal. This is at the Raider 28. Most teams nowadays kick from 8 yards back as opposed to 7. It used to be 7. So this is probably a 46-yard field goal. Greg Joseph can make a 46-yard field goal. He makes them at an over 80% clip, right? 78, 80% clip. You'd think, right? But hey, if you miss that field goal, suddenly they're in field position. I'm not going to say good field position. They're on their own 28. But they're in a field position, certainly better than a touchback, which would put you at on a kickoff on the 25, or on a punt, which is going to become relevant in a second. On the 20, that's 8 yards. You can't just give up 8 yards. So you do a surprise punt, and they are not expected to expect that, right? It's a surprise. That's the whole idea. So they're probably not going to be able to return it, which means you'll be able to down it at the 1. So you now don't have to worry about the punt touchback at the 20. Now you're comparing a 28, ball at the 28 to the ball at the 2. Like that's 26 yards. They have 18 seconds, 7 seconds, right? Because the punt takes time off the clock. That's one of the beauties of the punt. So it takes time off the clock. Probably not 11 seconds because this return took some time. But let's say it takes 8 seconds off the clock. So they have 10 seconds to go 98 yards. That's not Patrick Mahomes. So that's probably not happening. I shouldn't say 98 yards because they just have to score a field goal. Let's say they have to get to the 35 to set up something, to set up an insane field goal. It is Daniel Carlson, right? So there is that. But 35 is a 53-yard field goal, right? Okay. So let's say they have to go 65 yards in 10 seconds. That's probably not happening. The counter to that is that if you're up 6-0 and they get the ball at the 20 with, I would say probably 7 seconds left again, they're not going to score a touchdown. That's not going to happen. Now I don't want to be definitive about it. I've seen the Minneapolis Miracle, right? I know you can score a touchdown with 7 seconds left, but the odds are pretty low. That's why it is called a miracle. But you're down a touchdown. You're going to force them to be a little bit more aggressive. And the reason I chose 7 seconds, right, that 11 seconds comes off the clock, is that you've got about 4 seconds coming off the clock because of the kick, right? So now you've got 14 seconds left. You can get 7 seconds off the clock on the kickoff by just kicking it short unless they fair catch it. I guess I didn't think about that because you can do that. But most of the time they try to return it because they want as many opportunities for a big play as possible. So let's say you get 7. So it's the same scenario as the one that actually happened in real life, except you have 6 points instead of 3. The counter is that in a world where they need the touchdown, they're going to play more aggressively, and that's going to be better for them, right? Because historically we know that teams that are down 4 fare better than teams that are down 3. And I believe that extends all the way to 5 and 6 because those are not materially different in the final seconds of a game. So there's that. But that to me is a calculation you might make with a minute left, not with 7 seconds left. So those are all there is a defensibility to this, right? You reduce their aggressiveness. You have an opportunity to put the ball on the 2 or the 1 or the whatever, right? Inside the 5, right? You're not expecting them to return it. They're not expecting you to punt it. That's the whole point. And hey, Greg Joseph just missed a 49-yarder. Maybe he's going to miss a 46-yarder. So there's that. That is an element as well. What happened was that they got better field position, and the Vikings did not get any points to show for the better field position that they gave the Raiders. So the Raiders ended up, so the punt is 14 yards, the return is 17 yards. It was a -3 net yard punt. Now, for whatever reason, historical net yardage on punts is actually pretty hard to look up. I don't know why. It's just the way that some of these statistics sites are oriented. I'm sure if I had access to some of the other databases that I used to have access to, maybe I could look it up. So we'll just take it on faith that it's a 14-yard punt. We'll only look at gross yardage instead of net yardage when we look at this historically. So if that happens, or when that happens, we have the ability to compare his career net punting average to the historical career net punting average of everybody who has ever punted in an NFL uniform with at least one punt. Near Greg Joseph, for example, is Gary Kubiak, the very same one, who actually has 2 punts in his career and has averaged, like, I believe 16. I accidentally closed the tab that had all the numbers in front of me. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
We can just wing it. It's only NFL history. It's
fine. Wait, what are these names? Herb Weidemeyer? I don't care. It's fine. If you take a look at the career net yardage of punts, the worst career net yardage of punts, it should not shock you, is 0.0 yards. The thing that surprises me is that only one player in NFL history has that, which is, I didn't expect that, if I'm going to be completely honest. But only one player in NFL history has that. And he was a quarterback, as you would expect, right? Oh no, he was it was like 1948 or whatever. So he was like a wing back or a back or whatever, like not a real position. Rex Berry, here it is, I got it. So this was in 1950 something. 1951. So he played from 1951 to 1956. So he was a DB-HB. So he's a halfback. But he also played strong safety. He primarily played safety throughout his career. He has 1 punt. It was blocked for 0.0 yards. The only player in NFL history to have a career punting average of 0. At a career punting average of 1.0, Joe Theismann, who, while I was looking this up, I also found out he returned punts for the first 2 years of his career. He was designated as a quarterback, but they were just like, yeah, you're our best option. Go out there and return some punts. But no, he punted for 1 yard once, and they just decided, you know what, that's it. No more pooch punts for you, man. So they are ahead of Greg Joseph's 14-yarder. The only other player ahead of him is Pat Leahy, a kicker from 1974 to 1991. Nice long career. He has 1 punt. It was, like I said, was it like, where did I put it? It was 12 yards. To his credit, it was not returned. So, good on you. But it was 12 yards. He's a kicker, so probably a similar situation, or the punter got hurt. One of the two things. And then 4th in NFL history, with the 4th worst gross punting average in NFL history, is Greg Joseph with 14.0, and it got returned.
The man,
so it's a
the
negative
myth, the
net
legend.
Punting yardage. And it's also the only person who has had a career since 1991. So he's the lowest of the past 30 years.
How do you
Just incredible stuff.
How do you even do that? Like, the fact that, and again, the play didn't make any sense in context. It was dumb then. I realized that if you kick it there and you make a touchdown, still puts you in about the same spot. But like, that was just, it was dumb and frustrating, and just one of those, sure, why wouldn't there be this in this incredibly stupid game? I swear this season has just been an attempt at just goading John Boys into going, all right, so I need to do a 1-season like final part. Like that's all this is. This whole season is Kevin O'Connell going, yeah, I saw it. We're going to make it crazier.
Yeah, right? Like, okay. Just like things that you'd never expect to see. Like, I saw a kicker kick a 14-yard punt for seemingly no reason. I get to say that now.
Yep.
I don't know why it's a good thing.
Basically,
I
just to see that he could do it. Like, there was no point in anything that we saw on Sunday afternoon, and yet here we are. And we will go to the mailbag, and we're some stuff that we're going to cover in here is important-ish Vikings news as well. So we're just going to jump in, and we're actually going to start with Don from Ohio, who asks, when did the 2023 Vikings become the 2000 Baltimore Ravens?
When Kirk Cousins died. There's no other way to put it. Well, actually, a good way to put it is since Peter Bukowski tweeted about how bad the Vikings defense is going to be. Because since that tweet, the Vikings have ranked first in EPA per play. So thanks, Bukowski.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, there you go. There's your answer.
Jack Rackham asks, one of the more important questions of the day, was there any part of you, no matter how minuscule, that was hoping for a 0-0 overtime tie? Dude, third quarter. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I tweeted it out. I was like, hey, a tiny part of me wanted that to end in a 0-0 tie. I don't actually know how tiny that part was. But yeah, I definitely, like once you cross the, okay, I've sunk 2.5 hours into this, like you might as well get some like real NFL history out of it instead of, I mean, the win is good. I'm not mad that they won the game, but it would have been cool to see them slog it out in like the worst game in NFL history. Like that would have been like, you get to say that you saw that and it didn't even involve Josh Freeman. That's crazy.
Yeah. The idea that you could have that. The idea that the Josh Freeman game had more points still baffles me compared to this. Yeah. We're going to go to Kyle Segal, who asks, who is the team MVP up to this point? It's Ryan Wright, isn't
it? It might be Josh Metellus. I mean, like, in fairness, like Jordan Addison has a claim to it. TJ Hawkinson has a claim to it, as much as we just bagged on him at the beginning. They both, Christian Darrisaw has a claim to it. And it's hard to pick an individual defender, but like Metellus and Hunter are up there. Yeah, actually, I'm going to limit it to those two on the defense because it's like Cameron Bynum's had a really great season. I don't want to undermine that. But like Metellus has come up big in big moments. Daniel Hunter has been the best performer on that defense. I don't know that anybody, like if Ivan Pace had played the whole year, maybe you could, but I doubt he would play at that level for the whole year. Jordan Hicks, if he played the full year, might have had a claim to it, but it's like probably those two on defense. And then on offense, like Christian Darrisaw or Jordan Addison, or probably most likely out of anybody, TJ Hawkinson. So it's basically between Hawkinson and Hunter and Metellus for me. I'm going to go with Hawkinson, even though he's not the best tight end in the NFL. I'm sorry.
Even though he's not. Also from Kyle Segal, what's more important? The fact that the refs do usually warn players about lining up offsides, or the fact that Mahomes is apparently a giant crybaby? Yep, this is a Vikings fan that's back to giving crap for freaking out over bad officiating.
That was written into the question, by the way, for our listeners.
Yes.
Like Kyle wrote that into the question. So anybody who missed it, which I don't know how you could have missed it at this point, one of the greatest plays in regular season NFL history occurred when Mahomes threw a pass to Travis Kelce. Kelce, lumbers down the field. He's got all kinds of yards after the catch in front of him. As he's about to get tackled, he turns around and he throws it to Kadarius Toney. Underrated aspect of this play, by the way, as I'm narrating mid-play. Cam Lewis from the Buffalo Bills saw this coming. Like, he sees Travis Kelce turn into a throwing motion, and he's like, I have to deflect this pass. And he puts his hands up as if he's like a defensive lineman that just got stalled by an offensive lineman, waiting for his last chance to alter the play. Like, he's coached well, like J.J. Watt, right? Like, he's putting his hands up there, and he almost gets a finger on it. So, by the way, shout out to Cam Lewis for almost doing that. That's incredible. I know that Kelce has been doing this a little bit, so maybe you've been coached to look for it. I don't care. Heads up. Fantastic. Kelce throws a perfect backwards pass to Kadarius Toney, was a free shot to the end zone, and gets into the end zone. And wouldn't you know it, that gives them the lead, that might secure them the game. Holy crap. So cool for them to get a lead against a conference rival that they've been constantly battling and have mostly just been owning, right? two of the best quarterbacks the NFL has to offer, certainly two of the best quarterbacks the AFC has to offer, in a rivalry that's going to last a decade, right? This is going to be the Patriots Colts rivalry, right? If the Bengals don't have anything to say about it, right? Like, fantastic. Oh my gosh, incredible. Oh, there's a flag on the field. Oh my God. Okay, Kadarius Toney was lined up offsides. Okay, well, that's kind of a BS. Like, no one calls offensive offsides. That's nuts. I can't believe that. You just took away a play that would be in Travis Kelce's Hall of Fame highlight reel. Something Mahomes said, I guess, in a presser, which is kind of like a weird thing to say, but, fine. I did talk about how highlight reels would be affected by that. So if I get to say it, he definitely gets to say it. So I guess I can't complain too much, but kind of weird. But okay, you just took away just a sweet, really well executed play off of a call that nobody calls. That's kind of BS. Okay, well, they asked the ref after the game, like, hey, what's going on there? Because like Andy Reid said, like, hey, normally you like officials will warn you if you're offsides or whatever, right? If you're lined up too far ahead, they warn you. And I've seen this in NFL games, both on television and as a member of the press, and even as a fan at games, where an NFL official will tell a receiver, hey, you're too far forward, and the receiver will back up. I've seen this. This is a common practice. You talk to NFL players about this. That is common practice, that they'll warn you a couple of times. And if you keep doing it, they will flag you, but they will warn you a couple of times, just as they will on the ineligible rule for Jawaan Taylor, who was like lined up too far back. Who, by the way, he was lined up too far back on that play. But they very often warn those offensive linemen beforehand, like, hey, you're lining up a little bit too far back. Keep doing that, I'm going to have to flag you for being an ineligible receiver, basically. That's pretty common. They do that. That is like the whole, like, part of being a ref, part of the art of refereeing, as Kevin Seifert said, quoting John Perry, is to manage the game and let players know ahead of time, right? Because the job isn't just to call penalties, it's to make the game fair. So to do that, you adjust players when you can. Well, he didn't do that. Okay, why not? And it was like the assistant vice president of refereeing was there, and the ref was there, and they're like, okay, yeah, typically you would do that, but he was like way far ahead. He was so far ahead that we couldn't see the ball. And I'm like, okay, well, let me go back and check the replay. And check the replay, and he is insanely out there. He is almost in Bill's territory. Like, he is almost on the other side of the ball. Like, that is crazy how far ahead he is. For context, how far ahead he is, his back foot is further upfield than any player's front foot besides the center. Like, he is insanely far ahead. Like, yeah, okay, the Chiefs tackles line up pretty far back, especially Jawaan Taylor. Maybe that's not like a fair comparison. But the guards, the tight end, the other receiver, like, he was way far ahead. And then there's like a camera angle of you looking down the field and from like the down marker, and you cannot see the ball, which is like you need to be able to see the ball as an official, first of all. Second, that is a crazy that you'd obscure the ball for an official. Oh my God, he is crazy far ahead. That's nuts. Oh my God, that's just a penalty. And then Dan Orlovsky goes on to ESPN and he's like, okay, well, here's an interesting thing to point out. Here's like 3 or 4 other instances where Kadarius Toney was exactly that far ahead throughout the game. And boy, he was exactly that far ahead consistently. And in that case, why didn't the officials warn him then? That feels like something where you're like, because they either should have been like, hey, I can't see the ball, so I'm going to flag you. That's crazy. And he'd already gets the flag, and now he adjusts his play. So now in the final play of the game, he doesn't have to do that, or the final play of that drive. And they didn't do that. Well, someone else pointed out, well, on all those other examples, he's lined up on the other side, so the ref can see the ball. So it's not actually obscure. So it's not as obvious to the ref. Okay, but still, it's happening throughout the game, and you're only going to call it at the final play. And then today, like in the Miami Dolphins game, I believe it's Jalen Waddle, does exactly that. He's lined up exactly that far ahead. And you're just like, oh my God, okay, what's going on here? So my takeaway is this. You lose all of your situational forgiveness, right? The situational forgiveness is ticky-tack, whatever fouls, pass interference at the end of games, pass interference on Hail Marys, stuff like that. They do swallow the whistle in big moments. I actually don't love that. I think that the game should be called consistently throughout, including the final 2 minutes, because that's still part of the game. And you have to be the best at the game, not the best at particular types of the game, whatever, right? I don't care. That is the norm, right? But when it is egregious, they should call it. Like the people who say it didn't affect the play, or the people who say, like you should not be the story after the game, and so you shouldn't call it. That sucks. That is crazy over. Like, you cannot allow that to happen. He is crazy over the line. You can't do that, because that does gain advantages, right? Like, there's a reason to do it. If there isn't a reason to do it, then Andy Reid should just be telling him to stop doing that, right? Because it's not giving you advantage. It's just a penalty. But it like changes your angles. It gives you actually literally a head start. Like, I think that matters. Like, on that play, it may not have mattered, but they threw the flag right away, right? Like, they didn't know it was going to be a crazy cool play. They threw the flag right away. It's a penalty. So, like, I think the officials should have caught that earlier and warned them earlier. But I don't think that, or not even warn them, call the penalty. Because again, if it's that egregious, just throw the flag. But I don't think the fact that they didn't do that, which they should have, absolves the Chiefs, because that wasn't ticky-tack. That was crazy. Like, there's a neutral zone that is the length of the ball, right? And his toe is past the neutral zone. I've never seen that. That is crazy. So you got to call that when you notice it. It happened to be in that play, but like, the Chiefs never noticed this ever. Like, they get like the replays on the surface. They get the still shots on the surface. Like, they know what the play looks like. They know what he's supposed to be doing, and he's not doing it. And you're throwing him out there. So I think it's ultimately on the Chiefs. The grievance about the officials not officiating the way that they should is true. That doesn't make it primarily their fault. So that's my take on it. I do think like Mahomes is like, I think his anger, like, I get it. Like, I don't want to take away from it too much, but like that, he said that was a lot. Like, he got a little bit ahead of his skis trying to defend his take on that one. And I get it. You've got a huge stake in it. But like, he was crazy offsides, and Reed did mention that at no point during the game was Tony warned. So like that's a relevant piece. That should, like, the refs could have done better, but the Chiefs could have done better, and I think the Chiefs had a greater obligation to do better than the refs in that situation.
I believe it was Justice who had tweeted out at some point that during the Hail Mary at the end of the game, during any Hail Mary, quite frankly, they're not going to call anything. You could basically have a gun out there, and they're not gonna call it. So yeah, that was a little egregious.
I get it. I just, first of all, I don't like situational play calling, but second, or reffing, but second, like, at some point they're going to call it. And that wasn't a Hail Mary. It was slightly different. It wasn't the end of the game.
Yeah. Goggles for the Win asks, has anyone lost more money for themselves based off of their on the field play than KJ Osborne?
On the very same team, Joshua Dobbs.
Yeah. It's very possible. There's some alternate dimension where he like is going to have a statue outside of US Bank Stadium with the Lombardi in one hand and an astronaut helmet in another, and that's gone.
And I will say, like, not on this team, but this year, depending on what his guarantee structure looks like, Jimmy Garoppolo, like, he played pretty poorly.
Yeah, he's I cannot envision a scenario where he is on the Raiders next year.
Yeah, and like, the thing is, if the Raiders cut him next year, they get no cap savings. They don't get a huge cap penalty, net penalty, I should say. They just get no cap savings. Like, all of his dead cap essentially gets like rolled up, and they save in cap space a net $200,000, which is basically nothing. And I still think they might cut him, which means he loses out on his 2025 salary of $22.5 million plus the associated bonuses. He has a per game roster bonus of $1.5 million in 2025, which, I know he's not always healthy, but that amounts to $25 million. And that's a lot of money that he's not going to get in 2025 because he was bad this year. Now, mind you, they would restructure that, but the $50-ish million that constitutes would be money he would end up receiving if he had played well this year.
I mean, maybe he ends up playing for the Saints. Derek Carr's still got that contract down there.
Yeah, that one's going to be tough. Not that the Saints are very conscientious, but,
Is Jimmy G ever going to intentionally start for someone?
He intentionally started for the Raiders, but from here on out, no.
From here on out, I mean.
Yeah. From here on out, no. Also, I calculated that bonus wrong. I don't think it would be $50 million, but I think that it's like $30+ million $36+ million that he would end up missing out on as a result of not playing for the Raiders specifically in 2025.
Yeah. Also, for Reefs, it can't possibly be a worse game next week, Corner. What would the Vikings need to do to somehow play in an even worse game next week against the Bengals? I mean, obviously the 0-0 tie is on the table.
Yeah, the 0-0 tie is on the table. It feels like a boring answer, but it feels like maybe the only answer. I think, not the only answer, but I think it's like failing in all three phases in ways that we haven't seen since the first half of that Colts game, right? Like, you start Nick Mullins, and that ends up being a disaster. And so you just end up throwing up your hands and being like, okay, we couldn't win. Like there was no quarterback answer as you could expect, but still it's annoying, right? So Nick Mullins plays just like garbage, right? Throws a couple of pick sixes, maybe two, let's say that. You have a punt or a field goal, maybe both, but I'd say you only need one. Punt or field goal blocked, returned for a touchdown, something along those lines. And then the defense finally falls apart in a substantial way against Jake Browning revenge game, right? So that it's worse because it wouldn't be a 0-0 tie. It would be a sloppy 0-30 loss, which no one wants to live through that either.
Yeah, it's still within the realm of just turning it off and doing something better with your Saturday.
Right. So the one difference is that at least someone's having a good time in this scenario, the Bengals and their fans. In the Raiders scenario, no one was happy. So that is the difference. But from a Vikings perspective, it's to play a game that ends up giving up points in every phase.
I just wanted that game so badly. Well, first, for someone to score so I could just watch the game later.
That's an insurmountable lead. Bye.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. Well, Vikings are down 17-0. Okay, fine, whatever. I'll watch the rest of it later. Nope. I was stuck watching a terrible game. And you know what's funny? Reef, I believe I mentioned this to you. There was some push to get us to go to the Vegas game this year. There was a push to do the live show in Vegas this year.
We have a particular affinity for going to Las Vegas. So
yeah, and I one of the main reasons why we didn't is because I've already been to Vegas a couple times this year, and I was done. I was done with it. If you go to Vegas 4 times in a year, you might as well buy a timeshare. You're done.
Yeah, I would have been my 3rd or 4th time this year. It would have been a lot.
Yeah, nope, we were done. I next time I go, I can cash in my my under for wins for the Lions, or not for the Lions, for the Bears. Looking forward to that. But yeah, otherwise don't need to go for a little bit.
We got time.
Yeah, Jay Cruz asks, for a Reefs, what would you say you do here, Corner? What did the coaching staff do during the bye week that led to this offensive performance? Boy, there's a loaded question, and that's a terrible pun, unintentionally. Apologies.
They game planned for a Justin Jefferson centric passing game. They did that, right? I feel like that's important to point out that maybe they couldn't put that game plan into effect. The first pass of the game was to Jefferson, right? He ended up doing an all right job until he had to go to the hospital. So I think it's that's fair, right? They also tried installing some concepts that are, I'm not going to say uniquely tailored, well tailored to Joshua Dobbs, right? So they put in a zone read game, like a read option, like he pulls when the guy attacks the running back, he keeps when the guy that's when he keeps, and he gives when the guy stays flat or attacks the quarterback, right? Like it's a normal thing that they did. They install that, right? They have a moving pocket with more boots on play action, right? Like they did that. That was in the game. Well, when your guard gets beat off the snap off of play action, that's gone now. Like when Blake Brandel is just on the floor as soon as the snap occurs, the play action's dead. I'm sorry, you're taking that sack. There's nothing Joshua Dobbs can do about that. Okay, well, if you haven't practiced your mesh point stuff, this is really important. Like college teams that do read option practice this so much. So much. Like the mesh point stuff is like, it's really difficult to overstate how tough that is to get right if you haven't done it before. And when Dobbs tries to pull from Ty Chandler or Alexander Madison, in both instances, I noticed that it looked like Dobbs was pulling, one of which was highlighted by the broadcast. The running back was like, nope, and just kept the ball. That's not how that's supposed to work at all. So they tried installing that. It looks like that wasn't working. So they built a passing game around Justin Jefferson. They built a play action game around the existence of an offensive line, which, by the way, heading into the game, this offensive line was like top 5 in pass protection, right? Like it was playing well, right? So there's an offensive line that is supposed to be able to hold on for like 1.5 seconds before the pocket moves. And then your job gets a little bit easier, right? There's a passing game that has Justin Jefferson. There's a running game where Alexander Madison is averaging 6.7 yards a carry, I guess. Like he's doing that. And then he gets injured. So like the offensive coaching staff, like, yeah, I'm not saying they did it perfectly. They didn't, right? They maybe should have realized before the bye week started that like this was a pretty big pill to swallow in terms of changing everything that the offense does. But you know, they did stuff. They definitely did stuff. It's just when someone throws a bomb into it, there's like, you can't complain about the build quality after it. It's like, okay, yeah, they were put in a tough spot. And so then they just called their old offense when Nick Mullins was in, which turns out, yeah, maybe that was the solution the whole time.
Yeah, between that and the Dewey, yeah.
Oh yeah, so, yeah, that's an important element. That when did he get Friday? So the game plan's already been installed by then.
Yeah,
but still relevant.
Apparently, let's go to. I never know how to pronounce it correctly, but I just go off of the Sam Ekstrom parody of Quam or Cam Ekstrom, Ekstorm. Given how much the offense has to change with Dobbs in, is there a scenario where Hall is the backup with Dobbs as the emergency quarterback for the rest of the season?
Well, first of all, the Vikings don't seem to be rolling with a third quarterback. So if you mean emergency quarterback as the third quarterback, they have to make them active on game day. In order to do that, he has to be on the roster, which I guess he is. So maybe that's possible. But they don't seem to be playing around with that too much. As the emergency quarterback is just a position player. It's like Cordero Patterson, right? Or I don't know who it is now. KJ Osborne? I don't know. They like that guy, whoever they mentioned was that Cam Akers? Was the emergency quarterback? That feels right, which would be very sad but funny. But they mentioned that in the Atlanta game, who the emergency quarterback was, and then Cam Akers got hurt. But yeah, the emergency quarterback is like a position player. But the third quarterback, yeah, maybe. I do think that you could say that if you were to organize the depth chart, which is what this question is really asking, that if you organize the depth chart, it would be Nick Mullins, Jaren Hall, then Joshua Dobbs. And yeah, I think that scenario is totally like on the table, right? First, for the reason that you mentioned, right, is that, you know, you want to put Hall in because he knows the offense, and that's the thing that's working, is guys knowing the offense. But like the second thing is, like, Hall was the backup, right? Like when Nick Mullins was injured, it was Jaren Hall who went in. The only reason Joshua Dobbs started is because Jaren Hall got a concussion like right away. So yeah, there's totally 100% that scenario. But you start Dobbs because you put in the work. He gave you a spark. He might be able to recapture that magic, etc. Whatever that reason. That's not true when it comes to backups. So yeah, I think there's a scenario where he could be the third quarterback. That doesn't seem crazy to me.
Here's the best question of the entire episode. Same question asker. Given the cost of game tickets, flights, hotel/Airbnb, food, drink, and gambling, is yesterday's 3-0 game the highest visiting fan dollar spent to per point scored in NFL history?
So I have a very strong bias to saying yes to this for a couple of reasons. One is that it didn't ask for visiting fan dollar spent per point scored by the visiting team in NFL history, because 0 points would mean that number is, I guess, infinitely high. And so it's not that. It's total points. Okay, so we would have to go back to like 1971 or 2007, and I don't know what the visiting situation was, but I think that it's important to note, as James did when we talked about this question beforehand, the Vikings had a fairly strong contingent. So there were a lot of visitors. Now, they didn't all come from Minnesota. Some came from the local area. Las Vegas had a decent Vikings contingent before the Raiders showed up. Some came from close. I know that there's a fair amount of Vikings fans in Colorado based off of our experience there. Some came from California. There's a fair amount of Vikings fans everywhere. There's a decent amount in Arizona because it's like a retirement community. So some people from Minnesota retire in Arizona. Great. So, it's not all from Minnesota, so it's not all flights. But the higher number of fans there means that there's more fan dollars there. And it's not per fan. That's not what this question is asking. So it's per fan dollar. So you've got to account for that. You've also got to account for the way inflation has played out since 2007, which is the Miami Dolphins Pittsburgh Steelers game that we referenced, right? So in addition to the number of fans, there's also the fact that inflation since 2007 has been kind of nuts. And you would think initially that's not going to kind of matter, because if you adjust for inflation, that goes away. But in the specific areas isolated in this question, my intuition is, I'm not looking these up. I'm sure there are people familiar with policy details or economics, or at least the data, because this is like a strong discussion point on all political Twitter, but like especially like center left Twitter, about the nature of inflation. My impression is that stuff like flights, stuff like short-term rentals like hotels and Airbnb, and stuff like game tickets since 2007 have exceeded the pace of inflation generally. So if you adjust for inflation, these numbers would still be higher now than they would be in 2007. Now, the kind of somewhat controversial thing would also be adding food in here, because the nature of food inflation has been something that's been pretty recently debated over the past year. Let's ignore that, because while I think the price of lots of food has probably outpaced inflation, now we're left wondering what constitutes inflation. But I will say the massive expansion and normalization of sports gambling, which is included in the parameters of this question, would also make this one of the most expensive, because it's in Vegas, first of all. You got to gamble. That's a huge part of it. But sports gambling is normalized, and so people are just more likely to want to do it than they were in 2007, even if they go to a place where it's legal, where this was played was it played in Miami or Pittsburgh? You mentioned this, and I totally already forgot. Pittsburgh. So it was played in Pittsburgh, where in Pennsylvania it wasn't legal in 2007 to gamble, right? They weren't in New Jersey. So that's a big part of it too, is that not only was it normalized, it's legal in Vegas. So I think that that's huge to this calculation. So I think all of that is true. And then I had an idea, and I know James loved this idea by the way he reacted to it when I said it out loud.
Yeah, loved is the wrong term, I would say, for the record.
So there is at least one game where, as a result of circumstances outside of the NFL's control, I think it's a fair way to put it.
I think it is Sean McDermott.
where the visiting team in particular had a bunch of fans travel to the game and could not book a flight back. They couldn't take a flight back. The flights were canceled, so they couldn't go back to their home city, their home state. And so they had to book a bunch of emergency hotels, which is really tough. They had to spend a lot more on food over the next couple of days, which is really tough.
48 hours, yes.
Yeah, about. I mean, the next flights out weren't precisely 48 hours. I'd say maybe you had to, wait until even the next day. And there's a backlog, so you can't always get a flight right away. So in 2001, there's a Monday Night Football game between the Denver Broncos, who were hosting the game, and the New York Giants on September 10th, which was problematic from a flight's perspective on the day after.
Yeah.
And I would say the emergency spending you would have to do as a New York Giants fan may exceed the spending done after you adjust for inflation done in Las Vegas for this game by a substantial factor. So we had to look up the number of points scored in that game. It was 14 times the number of points scored in this Vikings-Raiders game. So is it 14 times the amount? Logically, probably not. But I think it's on the table.
It's close. If nothing else, it's worth putting out there. The calculations are near impossible to make, but it is possible. Right. That's the only other time.
And hey, emergency hotel prices, same day booking jacks up the price significantly. So it's not as if you take the normal hotel price and like double it or triple it because there's 2 more nights. It's a lot more than that because it's same day booking. Plus, I mean, probably the hotels were already kind of booked out, and it's a tough situation.
Yeah, that is about the only other possible one. Let's move away from that discussion as quickly as we can to Kenneth Allen, who asks, what's the deal with Josh Oliver?
I feel like a lot of people have been talking about similar discussions over the past week, James.
Yeah, and when they have, it's A, to make fun of Sean McDermott, and B, to try to break down what he possibly could have meant, and in the process, make fun of him further. See last episode where we did both of those things. Kenneth Allen asks, what's the deal with Josh Oliver? He was relatively hyped up during the offseason for his blocking excellence, but has he lived up to expectations? I know penalties are more visible than good blocks, but he has 4 holding penalties this year, which is 3 more than the last 2 years.
He has been incredible. He has been stunningly good at his job. Yeah, he's got 4 penalties, one of which was declined, I believe, or maybe one additional penalty that was declined. He has been like the best blocking tight end in the NFL. Like it's incredible how good he's been as a run blocker. Like he is carrying edge rushers into the laps of linebackers type stuff. He's been so good. Now the running backs have not been giving him, not been paying back all of the work that he's been doing, but he's been incredible. The last I checked PFF, he led the league in run block grade or whatever, which is fine. I was looking at his run blocking against who did they play before that Broncos game? The Falcons? No, the Packers.
Yeah.
And I was extremely impressed by, no, it was the Saints. I was extremely impressed by what he'd been able to do. And in the Broncos game, when I did get a chance to like watch it back a little bit, which I wasn't paying too much attention on account of having gone to the game live and then getting a disease. What I saw was extremely impressive from a run blocking perspective. So he's been really good, like really good. The penalties are annoying. Yeah, 4 penalties is kind of a lot at tight end. But, on balance, he's providing a lot more than he's costing. And there's a lot of tight ends with more penalties than that. So it doesn't bother me. I wish he'd cut down on them, but he's doing a fantastic job.
Also from Kenneth Allen, if you had to guess right now, would you expect this team to win any more games this season, or will they be favored in any of the remaining games?
I don't think they'll be favored against the Lions or the Packers. Against the Bengals, I think their defense is going to... I mean, we could just look that up now.
Yeah. I think the Bengals are going to end up being favored just simply because it's in Cincinnati. But, like...
I mean, the Vikings have the best unit of the four, right?
Yeah.
Like, with their... Okay, so the Bengals are favored by 3.5. Yeah, if they're not favored against the Bengals, that's it.
Yeah, that's it for that. As for if they're going to win any more games this year...
I could see them winning against the Bengals.
I could see them potentially winning against the Bengals. I could see them potentially winning against the Packers. And the Lions...
If this Packers team shows up, the one we just watched, yeah, that's on the table for sure.
And the Lions are dropping like a stone right now. So we'll see.
Yeah, there's opportunities is the best way to put it. There's some opportunities here for the Vikings.
They will need to score more than 3 points, though. That is going to be key.
Probably. You don't know that, James.
Well... I'm going to make a dangerous assumption here, but possibly. Zach Dixon asks, is there precedent for paying a defensive coordinator the same as a head coach? And does the coaching staff count against the cap? The answer to the second half of that is no.
Yeah, it's one reason that the Cowboys spend through the nose on coaching and the front office. They keep on giving, what's his name? It's not McCarthy. McKay, I think? I don't know. McClay, their vice president of football operations, keep on giving him raises because he keeps on getting interviews to be a general manager and the Cowboys value him too much. So they just keep on giving him raises because you don't have to worry about the cap. As far as I could tell from my research, there's never been a precedent in the NFL to do that. In the college level, there kind of has been, like not quite. Like I don't think there's been a coordinator that made more than their head coach, but there's been coordinators that have made more than most head coaches, like Kirby Smart did at Alabama before Georgia hired him. He was making more than all but I think 3 head coaches or something like that. Don't quote me. It's just my memory on that one. But in the NFL, I don't think that it's ever been the case that a coordinator has been paid more than their head coach or the same as their head coach. It would not shock me if a coordinator was paid commensurate to the salaries one expects of a head coach. Right now, the lower level salary for a head coach is around $4 million a year. So if like you're young and untested and you don't have a bunch of leverage and you're one of the later ones to interview for a team and they didn't get their first or second choice, you're probably $4 million. Or if you're a retread who's got like a second chance, something like if Leslie Frazier signs again with somebody as a head coach, which I mean, now he won't because he took a sabbatical this year. But, as an example, it'd be like 4.5, maybe up to $6 million a year is kind of the lower end. And I could see a coordinator potentially in the $3 million range, which is kind of in that range, right? But no, I don't think that there's, as far as I know, I don't think that there is that precedent. It's also very difficult to look up because assistant coach salaries, first of all, head coach salaries are not very well published, but assistant coach salaries are very rarely published, ever.
You are correct, by the way. It was McKay.
Okay.
Also from Zach Dixon, can you put into context how great of a season Ivan Pace Jr. is having? Of course, it's amazing given that he's an undrafted free agent, but it seems like he might be having an amazing year for any linebacker.
Yes and no. So he has been asked to play a very specific role. I guess in this specific game, a little bit less so, but he has been mostly a sub-package guy that has been absolutely killing it at what he's been asked to do. But there's a lot of linebackers that have been asked to do everything, including in their rookie year, right? And so I don't want to take a ton away from Ivan Pace, who's having a really great season. PFF ranks him 20th overall at linebacker, and I believe he's the highest of any rookie. Let me do a quick check. No, he has since been surpassed by people who have played 25 snaps and 10 snaps. So of anybody who's played at least 30 snaps, for context, he's played 500, he has the highest grade for any rookie linebacker. The only reason I mention that is because for a while he had the highest grade of any rookie linebacker regardless of snaps, which is insanely impressive. But Noah Sewell took 10 more snaps and has since surpassed him. Bully for him. It is a truly incredible year, right? So he is playing like the best rookie linebacker in the NFL. Fine. At what he's asked to do. But if we compare it to let's say the rookie year, one of the best rookie linebacker performances I've ever seen, Luke Kuechly, right? Which I don't think anybody was suggesting he was playing like Luke Kuechly. I'm just using this as a comparison for context. Kuechly was asked to do everything. He was asked not just to, blitz when he needed to blitz. He was not just asked to follow the gaps as people took on blocks and take on a running back. He was not just asked to take on a fullback when the play headed towards him and squeeze the lane. He was not just asked to cover the hook zone. He was asked to do everything, which also meant that he was covering deep. That also meant he was lining up on the line of scrimmage. He was spinning. So he would line up in one gap and get to the other gap. He was also calling plays on the defense as a rookie, right? So he was a leader on that defense immediately, right? He was playing outside deep coverage on some very rare occasions. He was playing Tampa 2 linebacker. He was playing in the box. One time or two, he rotated up to like safety, which is what I'm talking about. He played a ton of different roles. He was asked to do everything a linebacker was asked to do. And Ivan Pace is basically the opposite right now. Now, I believe he didn't blitz all that much in this game, or at least when he was tasked with the blitz, it turned out to be a run play, so it didn't matter. But he's primarily like a blitzing linebacker who plays downhill against the run. He does not do that much in coverage. On passing plays, he's often blitzing instead of playing in coverage. When he is in coverage, his coverage assignments are not particularly complicated. He's not doing match zone type stuff. So I don't want to take stuff away from him. Undrafted rookie linebacker having an incredible season, right? He should be on the all-rookie team at linebacker. Like, no question about that. But it's not like up there with a high-level rookie linebacker performance. Even the ones that I think historically have been overrated, like Patrick Queen, for example, I think had an overrated rookie linebacker year, right? Like, I don't think it's like that because he's not being asked to do all those things. Just fine. He's playing really well in the role that's being asked of him. But that's the context, is that he is essentially not even a heat-seeking missile. He's just a missile that's being pointed in particular directions, and he's blowing up plays. And that is awesome. It is so cool that he's got the capacity to do that. When he's asked to do more, like in this game, like if he plays more of this type of game where he's asked to do a little bit more, then we can kind of talk about him like he's an all-around linebacker, right? But he just hasn't played that much in coverage relative to like all of the snaps that he's taken overall. So, that's, and his coverage assignments are relatively easy. So that's like the context, right? Is he's there's no question right now in my mind, he's the best rookie linebacker. I think if you looked at was the linebackers in 2022, I didn't think that they were particularly impressive. I'm trying to remember. But because Devin Lloyd, I think, for the Jaguars was like a guy who had like 2 good games to begin the year, and then he just kind of fell off. But actually, a good comparison might be Leo Chenal, who last year was PFF's highest rated rookie linebacker with minimum 200 snaps. Brian Asamoah had minimum 100, had a higher grade, but that was kind of an interesting situation where he just played at the end of the year. Leo Chenal, also basically a sub-package role, also primarily a blitzer, also extremely good at the job that he was asked to do, and that was about it. You'll note that he doesn't have a huge role in the Chiefs defense this year. It's like along those lines. But it wasn't impressive last year, that linebacker group. So one could argue that like over the past couple of years, he's had the best performance at linebacker, but he's not like the most complete linebacker over the past couple of years. So you can't really say like that. It's hard because he's not playing the same position really. So you can't really say that it's like up there with some of the better rookies, but there's just no rookie linebackers playing at a high enough level to be comparable.
Let's go to Sammy, who asks, for the show's wordplay corner, now that Josh Dobbs has crash landed, what other quarterback could replace him with that is equally rife for puns?
I think Mullins has a lot of puns because you got to like mull it over, right? There's also the fact that like Nick Mullen is a comedian. Like he's just a person who's a comedian. He's pretty well known for, can I say the name of the podcast? Do you know what I'm talking about, James?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So he's pretty well known in my circles on Twitter, like leftist-ish circles, for being kind of an edgelord among leftists. And his humor runs very similar to the humor that you see on Chapo Trap House. He is one of the co-hosts, I'll just say it, of the Cumtown podcast. It's the name of the podcast. It's pretty edgy. People have been canceled for liking it. Taylor Swift's last boyfriend was a fan of that and its successor podcast, The Adam Friedland Show. Like, that's like a thing. It also shockingly has had like a huge impact on online leftist comedian culture. That sounds very, very niche, and I guess when put like that, it is. But I don't know. It's a big impact, bigger than you'd expect. But his name is Nick Mullen. He is the more famous of the Nick Mullenses. And so there's references to that. I made a Nick Mullen joke during the game, which a disturbing number of you got. And yeah. So there's that. But like literally like mulling it over is like a thing, right? Like there's a lot, like there were a bunch of Christian Ponder puns, right? I don't know that Nick Mullins has like a history like an astronaut, right? So you can't do astronaut type stuff. But I don't know that he has like that history that is so unique and interesting that you could map it onto that. But I think there's opportunities there.
Next question is from Cody, who asks, for a Reef's neo-regressionist corner, is Jordan Addison regressing, or has his subpar play been the result of poor quarterback performance by Dobbs?
I don't think that Jordan Addison is regressing. I had always expressed that like when he was getting a couple of those games, like the 60-yard games where he'd get like a touchdown and like 4 catches for a total of 60 yards or something like that. I'd always expressed that it seemed like he was being used extremely correctly, but he was relatively one-dimensional. He wasn't a complete receiver. And when Kirk Cousins was the quarterback, didn't matter. They would put him in positions to succeed, and he would. Well, Josh Dobbs at quarterback and probably Nick Mullins at quarterback, you're just not going to get that often, especially without Justin Jefferson. He's going to have to take on a bigger role, but without the quarterback that can maximize him, you're just not going to see that much in terms of yardage. I don't think he's playing any differently or any worse. I just think that the things that they're asking him to do are no longer the things that he excels at. They're the things that he needs to learn to get better at as he like evolves as a rookie, right? So I don't think he's regressing or anything like that. I think it's just now he's being put by a product of circumstance into worse situations.
Damian Barrett asks, for a Reef's grandparenting corner, how should we tell future generations of the hardship we had to endure on Sunday?
Boy, I would use as much catastrophic language as possible. Because there's the, back in my day, we had to walk uphill both ways in the snow. Like there's that, right? But like this is like catastrophic.
Yeah.
This is like Dust Bowl level stuff.
Well,
right?
I mean, if you've ever listened to someone talk about a certain blizzard that happened in the 90s over Halloween, I feel like that's the energy that you go with.
Do you know like the National Weather Service has like multiple articles about that? Like the National Weather Service. Like it was pretty big.
That's your energy. That's how you treat it. It was that bad.
Yeah. I think that you should talk about it like people who grew up during the Depression talk about what they had to cook. Just like, oh, you had to like mix flour into your mashed potatoes and then water down the mashed potatoes so that they would extend, and then put gelatin in them so that they would reconstitute. That's disgusting. Okay. Cool. Thanks, Grandma.
Yep.
Like talk like that. Like, oh, you had to put a little guy up on the screen so that you could pretend someone was actually scoring a field goal. Okay, that's crazy.
Yeah. Nolan Kaler asks, for North Code, which is the most disappointing thing that has happened in the course of the Norse Code universe this year? The injustice of JMU, a typically infuriating Vikings team, or, of course, a tragic Grey Cup loss for our brothers in Bud Grant?
Well, we wouldn't know anything about the Grey Cup loss because the ESPN didn't air it this year.
Yeah, as it turns out, not something that they were able to do. Weird arranging. I didn't like that at all.
Yeah.
But Lurking asks, not a question, but a suggestion. You guys should do a podcast in tribute to this game. 2 hours and 55 minutes of absolute silence, and then one of you blurts, well, that sucked. But at least it's over.
Great suggestion. I don't know that James and I could be in the same room and not talk for more than 10 minutes at a time.
Yeah, I think that eventually, like we were joking pre-show, is like even if we were like driving to like Green Bay or something, eventually one of us would go, "Oh, there's another quick trip," and then that would be it. Like we'd be done. Or you do the whole like cow thing on the side, like you'd be done. You couldn't be silent for that long. The Damn Grill asks, who had the most fantasy points in this game? I mean, in the Hell League, it'd be Greg Joseph, but
yeah, no question,
not by much, because he did miss the kick earlier. So
yeah, and you do get negative yards, but it's a 49-yard miss, so that's something.
Yeah.
Let's see, the Las Vegas defense got 12 points in standard scoring. And Alexander Madison got 6.6 points in scoring. Let's see. The Minnesota Vikings defense got 20 points. Yes, the Vikings defense got 20. And then the Vegas defense got 12. So I guess those two, which are pretty unsatisfying answers. And then Aiden O'Connell got 6. So I guess Alexander Madison? That's screwed up, man. That is crazy.
That doesn't seem...
He got hurt halfway through the game, and he's not good. Why?
I don't... Look, I don't make up the rules. Wait, except in the case that, that I do.
In the league that you do make up the rules, Greg Joseph crushed.
Greg Joseph with 12.2 points.
So not as much as the Vikings defense, but more than any other player.
Yeah. That's gross. Whew. Let me close that. I have to write about that here tomorrow. So let's ignore that and go on to the next question, which is from Chris, who asks, what is the record for the most unique quarterbacks started by one team in a single season? Without using AI, what's your answer?
Oh my God. So I was trying to figure out so I'm sure somebody who listens to this could figure out right away. That's great. Good for you. I don't want to know anymore. This took like a long time. So I try to use like Pro Football Reference and StatHead to find it. And I just cannot figure out the way to manipulate the search parameters given their database to figure out the number of quarterbacks that started for a team in a single season. There might be a way to do it. I couldn't do it. I spent a little bit looking through all of the options available to me to see if I could find a way to do it. Couldn't do it. All right. Well, I'm like, well, sir, surely someone has had to have this question before. And obviously, there are a bunch of websites out there that look for the most Googled questions and just have an answer for you. So I Googled, why not? Just Google it. The most quarterbacks to start for a single NFL team in one season. And the 8 or 9 responses I got from like articles and websites that provide that information were all about the most quarterbacks that have started in a single year, which we answered last episode, which was not great, right? I did get a result for the most quarterbacks to have started and won a game for a team in a single season. Probably, I don't know if it's accurate, but the answer is this year's Cleveland Browns, who started 4 quarterbacks. All 4 quarterbacks have won a game, which, sure, Cleveland, of course. But 4 is not the answer, right? Because the Vikings are at 4, the Browns are at 4. A lot of teams historically have had 4. So I'm trying to figure this out. And there are just certain websites you avoid when you want like a genuine answer to the question. One of those websites is Quora. Quora does not give you accurate information. Anybody can just answer a thing on Quora. It's like Yahoo Answers, but somehow worse in terms of formatting.
Yes.
Like just formatted worse. And the problem I was having is always the problem I have on Quora. I don't know how to solve this problem. If you know the answer, that's a problem for you because it means you know how to use Quora. Shame on you. But whenever I am done, right, I'm out of options and I click on Quora, I can only ever seem to find the top answer and the replies to that answer, but not the other answers. I get other questions, and those other questions show me the other answers. So I actually see more answers for other questions than the question that brought me there. It is insane, right? And by the way, the top answer was, I don't know, but here is my guess. And then he spelled one of the names wrong. Like, just come on. So I'm having like a lot of trouble trying to figure this out. And I'm like going back and forth. Eventually, like Google has an answer, again, in Quora, where you can see the answer in the snippet. And then when you search for that text, it doesn't appear on the page. So Google gives me an answer. That answer has been cached into the Google database for that website page. And then when you click on that website, when you go to that page, that text just does not appear. And so I can't find it because I can only find one answer to a question, even if multiple people have answered the question. I don't know how this stupid website works. But one thing I found out about Quora is that they have integrated AI in the loosest sense of the term. I've written about why this isn't really a great name for large language models, but we're just calling it AI because that's what people know it as. And it does a disservice to the millions of other types of not just machine learning, but like types of AI that are being developed, because now everyone's going to think, oh, it's the thing that steals artists' images and gives you crappy answers in text. It's ChatGPT. Well, this is ChatGPT. It's not AI, but we call it AI. And it gave me an answer. And I was like, this answer is like concise. It's nice. It's confident. All of the features I criticized in my piece on AI, but it is an answer. So I was like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. Let me double check that. So I click on that again, I want them to tell me more. It doesn't work. So I asked them again to tell me more. And it gives me the names of all the quarterbacks finally, because it was like these 7 players during the strike shortened season started for Washington at quarterback. And they didn't give me the names. So they said 7 players. And I was like, do you want to learn more? So I clicked yes. So they gave me the names. And I recognized those names. At least one of those names was not a quarterback. And I was like, oh, that's an issue. And some of those names, I was like, I'm not confident that they played for Washington in 1987, but I'm not so confident that I can definitively declare them wrong. I'm not an expert of the 1987 season or Washington. So I go to the Pro Football Reference page for the 1987 Washington team, and there's 3 quarterbacks, substantially less than 7, it turns out. Now, those 3 quarterbacks were named in the ChatGPT answer, but one thing I found out was that when I looked up one of those names, a name I didn't recognize, because there's like 6 other names, right? 3 of those I know played quarterback for Washington. 2 of them I know played quarterback, maybe for Washington at one point. And one of them I know didn't play quarterback at all. And then one name I didn't recognize. So I Google that name. And I Google that name and like football or NFL or something. And the only thing that pops up is a player drafted by the New York Jets last year to play safety. And when I look up that name in Pro Football Reference, it only returns that safety from 2022. So then I'm like, that's weird. Why did ChatGPT do that? So I go back to ChatGPT. I've still got the window up, and I ask, who is Tony Adams? Or tell me more about Tony Adams, I think is what I type in. And they were like, oh, we're sorry. Actually, he didn't play quarterback for Washington at all. So our mistake. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. With that in mind, which team has started the most quarterbacks in a single season? And then it gave me 2 paragraphs of an apology for getting it wrong, which, okay, sure. And then they were like, the 2019 Cleveland Browns started 9 quarterbacks. And it's like, I know that's not true. I know that's not true. No way. Get out of here. And they list Baker Mayfield, who did start at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, Garrett Gilbert, who did play quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, and like Mason Rudolph, who did start at quarterback in the AFC North. Same with Devlin Hodges.
Just a bit outside.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit, and then Devlin Hodges also started at quarterback in the AFC North that year. I'm like, okay, we're getting way out of this one. And then Brandon Allen, who started quarterback in the AFC. So that's okay. So I was like, tell me more about all 9 of these quarterbacks. And with no cognizance about what it had just told me about what those quarterbacks had done, that they all started at least one game for the Cleveland Browns. It was like, 1, Baker Mayfield started 16 games for the Cleveland Browns, which was most of their season. And it's like, that is technically most of their season in that it was all of it. Garrett Gilbert, who did not start for the Cleveland Browns. So-and-so, who did not start for the Cleveland Browns. Or Mason Rudolph, who did not start for the Cleveland Browns. He did, however, start for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I was like, come on, man. I was like, okay. And so I typed in, okay, that means that the Cleveland Browns does not hold the record for the most starts at quarterback for a team in a single season. Who is it? So they apologized again. And the number went up.
Again.
Yeah, it was like, and now it was like 10. 10 quarterbacks started for both I forget, it was like the 2017 Cleveland Browns or something egregiously wrong, right? And the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I was like, the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers only played 14 games. How could they have started 10 quarterbacks? That's crazy. Like, I know they're the worst team in NFL history, right? Like, I know that before the Lions went 0-16 and then the Browns later went 0-16, that the Buccaneers went 0-14, and then they continued a streak of losses into 1977. That's the thing they're known for. So I could see them starting multiple quarterbacks. So go to the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and there are a lot of people that have thrown passes for them and have started for them. A lot. Many of them played wide receiver or running back, and that number does not add up to 10. They had 3 quarterbacks that started, I believe, right? So I was just like, you know what? I bet the 1987 strike season, which going back to that original Quora answer was what that guy was like, I think it was the 1987 New England Patriots. I don't know that for a fact. I just remember watching them. I remember watching Doug Flutie and Steve Gorgon. That was the name he misspelled. And I was like, you know what? That's actually like, because the strike shortened season and all that. Okay, fine. So I go to 1987, and I look at all the quarterback starts in 1987, and I add them up by team. I have to separate it because two players played for 2 teams that year or started for 2 teams that year. So I had to separate it out. And like 4 different teams started 5 quarterbacks that year. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the answer. So the Atlanta Falcons, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Chicago Bears, and Steve Gorgon's Patriots.
So that's where we were at. Thanks, AI, for whatever journey you took us on. Let's wrap it up with Arif Wazowski, who asks, can we get a list of enemies of Arif, like in a power ranking?
No. So in the Discord, my greatest ally in the Discord is Lauren, our soul mod. Which, put like that, seems like we're overburdening her, but it is a lightly moderated Discord in all fairness.
Fair. As the person in charge of it, yeah, fair, yeah.
But I'm not going to explain the series of events that like led us to this, but Lauren added yet another sticker to the Discord. And though Lauren is my greatest ally among this Discord full of malcontents and antagonists, she also creates the most opportunities for me to get dunked on in that Discord. So I said that she was one of my greatest enemies. And then someone responded with, isn't that you? True, I am my own greatest enemy, but I only said one of my greatest enemies.
I don't think Lit was in your top 5 for Spotify, so yeah, you're probably not your own worst enemy.
Well, I'm my own worst enemy, yeah. Lit is on like my top 100 most played though, because again, that 90s playlist where I'm like super sad. That's not on the sad playlist, but it's on the sad playlist. I'm like gradually revealing more members of this playlist. Like they were like, hey, this is when you listen to Spotify. I only looked at my Spotify Wrapped now. Like Lauren Cox pointed out to me, like, hey, everyone did this 2 weeks ago. Well, I just logged into Spotify for the first time in 2 weeks. And they're like, hey, you played Spotify for was it 360 minutes on May 29th. And I was like, yeah, that was when I was the most depressed. Thank you, Spotify. And they were like, congratulations, that's so cool. And I was like, I disagree. But yeah, so all of the top 5 artists that I tweeted out, all of them, they're all in both of those playlists. So if you wanted to know, actually, I don't think Motion City Soundtrack is on it, and they're my second most played. But either way, if you wanted to know, I tweeted about it. I think it's Third Eye Blind, Motion City Soundtrack, Eve 6, Semisonic, and I forget what was at 4. Semisonic was at 5. Gin Blossoms, which, sure. That was just like a weird one to me because they're not like one of my favorites, but they're in all of my 90s playlists because it's like, what's more 90s than a Gin Blossom song? Yeah, right? It's like, yeah, they're not like the guys, but hey, it's not bad. Hey, Jealousy, that's a banger, right? And I imagine if you combine Ben Folds and Ben Folds 5, that would actually be near the top 2. But yeah, so that's a preview of the playlist. So someone was like, okay, well, and I was like, you're right. The gap between first and second is like pretty big. But in fairness, and with all respect to Lauren, who did point out that she's also my greatest ally, which fair enough. I don't think these are mutually exclusive. And I was like, with all due respect to Lauren, I don't want to like, she's not second, right? And what did I say was on that power ranking? Let me be clear, Lauren is one of my greatest enemies. With all respect to her, I do not believe she ranks second. The Bean Fool, for example. That's
Luke Braun.
That's Luke Braun. I don't think that was ever explained in the podcast. The Philly Child who writes for Bill Simmons. The concussed wrestler we sometimes bring on who previews the Eagles. The Bears twink we bring on to preview the Bears. Warren Sharp might be on this list. And of course, Justice. And then I realized, I have a list of enemies that's easily accessible in my brain. That's normal.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah. And then I did not power rank them, and I won't because it will give one of them pleasure. The one I hate the most, I feel like that's counterintuitive. I don't want to give them. The person who ranks second on my enemies list is going to be super happy about that fact.
Yeah. I think Drawplay Dave was just upset he didn't make the list. That's just going to embolden him.
Mission accomplished.
That's just going to embolden him and make him try harder.
Him making the list rewards him for his behavior.
Well, this is the reality in which we live. And with that is going to be the end of this episode of Norse Code. If you guys have enjoyed it, we'll be back later this week to preview the Bengals game. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So I've got a recap of I'm going to just call it the Ivan Pace game. The Ivan Pace game, because I wanted to focus on like people who played well as opposed to the quarterback mess that we had. So I've got that recap up. That's for free. You don't have to pay. So that one's sometimes when I've got a piece that's like a game recap that gets written quickly or is using publicly available data and doesn't use a ton of quotes or whatever, I'll just make that one free because I just think that like, I want to, if people are paying for it, I want to, make sure that I put more effort into stuff. And I like the piece, but it's free. And then I've got a piece, I believe, coming up on Zone Coverage. So that's coming out soon. I don't know what Luke's film room piece is going to be this week. I'm sure it's going to be awful like all the other ones have been. So you can look forward to that. And then I think I've got a rant about power ranking saved up. I don't know if I'm going to publish that this week or next week or even at all this year, but it's somewhere in my hard drive, so I'm sure I can spit it out. So we'll see. Otherwise, normal stuff to plug. WideLeftPost.substack.com.
And that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll be back later this week. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much. And maybe just put that in a garage next time. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed, at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.